Hey guys, this is Mark Steele, your real estate broker and broker of record, Justo Realty, doing a quick training for you on some of the paperwork that we use for buyer transactions. Now, I know you've done a couple of deals here or there. Maybe you've seen some from some of the other teammates, but for yourselves and for your knowledge, here's a quick overview of the paperwork that we normally use for buyer transactions, okay? So I'm not gonna read every part of every transaction, but I will show you how to fill in every part of the transaction paperwork, just so you know what to do. So I'm going to share my screen with you here so you can see what I'm looking at. Going into Google Chrome. Okay, so now you should see my transaction paperwork through Authentisign or Transaction Desk, right? So the first one that we're looking at is Buyer Representation Agreement. Of course, this is important because when you are working with a buyer and the transaction is finished, this is one of the documents out of many documents that we have to have on record in case Rico comes by, wants to do an audit, make sure all of our paperwork is in order. At the same time, even though we are a no obligation brokerage, and if a client comes to us and says they don't want to work with us any longer, we're not going to keep them here with us. But just so for your knowledge and for any other traditional brokerage out there, this representation agreement is essentially a contract between you and that client to say, I represent you and your needs, and in exchange, you're agreeing to work exclusively with me as your realtor. Okay, so on this BRA or Buyer Representation Agreement, we use the same document, whether it's a purchaser or someone who's looking to lease a property. Okay, so whether they're a buyer or renter, we use the same document. The very first thing we enter here is the brokerage name. So of course, our brokerage is Justo Inc. Brokerage. That's what we put in for that. We put in our address here as well. So Unit 212, 23 Les Mill Road, North York, Ontario, 3B, 3P6. Telephone number 647-794-0064. Okay, and in the next section here for the and buyer, we put our buyer's names. So we're going to say the typical John Smith. We'll call him John Steele for today. So John Steele, and if there's a partner with them as well, we'll put the and symbol and Maxine Steele. All right, so our clients for today are John and Maxine Steele. All right. Now, typically, I don't put the client's address in here, but some people can. It's really a matter of preference. And the reason for putting their address is to make it a lot more specific for them. Again, not necessary, but if you have it and you feel like putting it in, please feel free. So we're just going to say 123 Main Street. Now, for the next section, again, part of their address for municipality, you could put Mississauga, and then the postal code L4Z0A1. Now for the next part here where it says the buyer hereby gives the brokerage the exclusive and irrevocable authority to act as the buyer's agent, this is essentially saying from this commencement date to this end date, you agree to work with me exclusively as your realtor. And again, you won't use any other broker or a realtor out there to work with your needs and to work for your needs. So whatever day you start working with them is the first day that you put in this transaction here, or in this section here. So for the sake of today's example, we're going to say March 5th is our commencement date, and we'll say 11 o'clock a.m. All right. And for the expiry date, this all depends on how long you agree to work with that buyer. Now, we can talk about this in a different section, but this could be used for a number of reasons. It could be maybe they're not looking to buy something for the next year and you want to keep them locked in with you for that time. Or maybe because they are nervous about signing paperwork with one realtor and they want to only work with you for one specific property, you might decide to say, we're going to work only from today until Saturday. So you have 2 days just for this specific property. We'll put an offer in and I'm agreeing. The client is agreeing not to work with anybody else during that period. All right, normally I'd put 3 months just to be on the safe side. March, April, May, June 5th, and you're okay there. Now this circle here, some people sign this or initial this circle by mistake, just because it's something too initial. What it's actually asking you for is if the buyer representation agreement is intended to last longer than 6 months, that is the only time you would initial this circle here. If it's a 3-month term, if it's a 4-month term, or a 5-month term, do not initial this circle, okay? But if you and the client are working together for 6 or more months, you would then put their initials in here. All right, the next section is going to be the property use. So again, while they're working with you, what kind of property are they looking for? Normally, I just put single family home. If you're looking for a duplex, you could put that. If you're looking for a triplex, you could put that. Whatever type of property you're looking for, you can fill that in there, okay? Give me 1 second here. Okay, geographic location. Again, this depends on your client and how specific you want to be. Normally, I'd just put Greater Toronto area. This is going to be the greatest coverage and greatest protection for you, because if they're looking in Toronto and by some chance they decide to work with someone else and get a property with someone else, you can say, hey, you said you're going to work with me for the entire GTA, so we got to work together, okay? And for this circle to initial here, this is a relatively new circle that they added to this document over the last year, I believe. And it essentially says the buyer hereby warns that the buyer is not a party to a representation agreement with any other registered real estate brokerage for the purpose for the purchase or lease of a real property of the general description indicated above. So essentially what it's saying is your buyer is agreeing that they aren't working with anybody else for any other transactions. So this circle has to be initialed by your client and your client's partner as well, okay? Again, it protects you and lets you know that they agreed they're only working with you. And hopefully they're being honest with that. So they initial that circle, and of course they would initial this circle for initials of buyers here as well. At the same time, you'll initial here for the brokerage. Scrolling down, in this section is where you'd enter the commission that you expect to receive for the transaction. Now, I've never worked in a deal myself where the buyer paid my transaction, so normally I leave this part blank. If it is ever a case where the seller or the listing says no commission is being paid, then you can discuss with your buyer at that point. But again, normally, I've never had it done. So what I usually put in this line for the or is as stated in listing agreement. And this is kind of a catch-all to say whatever listing you guys decide to purchase, your commission is going to be equal to whatever the commission offered was on that transaction paperwork or on that listing page, okay? If it's a lease, same thing, as listed or as stated in lease agreement. And it's usually half of 1 month's rent for most of them, okay? Now here in this section, typically we put the holdover period. Normally it's 90 days. Again, for our transactions and our brokerage, we have no obligation for the client to actually stay with us because we want them to have freedom. If you don't want to work with us, let us know why. And if you want to move on, please feel free. But typically you put 90 days for this holdover period. And what this essentially means is, 1 second, there's a chat popping up here. Okay. I'll answer that question in just a second, Anthony, thank you. What this typically means for the 90-day holdover is that if after the term of your transaction is over, within 90-day period, if they go back to a home that you showed them and they purchased that property, you would still be owed commission because you worked with them during that period. You showed them the property during your initial term, and then for some reason or other, they went back to that property, maybe to save commissions, and decided to put an offer on that property by themselves. So you'd still be owed commission within that 90-day period, okay? So seeing your question here now, what if they signed the form working with a realtor and started working with someone else? So I'm going to go into working with a realtor next. Working with a realtor essentially explains what it means to be a client of a realtor versus a customer of a realtor. But it isn't the same as the buyer representation agreement. It's not really a contract. It's more of an explanation, and they sign it to say, I understand our relationship. Okay? So we'll get into that one next. Great question, though. Thank you. Okay, now as I said, I'm not going to read all of the clauses on this transaction, but hopefully you received my email. I think I sent it around 10 o'clock or 10:30, 10:45, which has all of the transaction paperwork that you'll need for a buyer transaction with all of the plain English listed on there. So above this clause, you'll see a little red paragraph that explains what this paragraph means. All right, so I'm going to skip over most of that for now to show you how to fill everything in. Okay, again, your clients will sign in this paper, in this circle here. You're going to initial in this circle here. Scrolling down some more, if there are any schedules to your BRA, you're going to put what schedules there are. So as you know, with Justo, we have a Schedule A for our BRA. So we're just going to put the letter A right there, okay? Next, authorized to bind the brokerage. You, as the sales rep or the realtor, are going to sign there. You're going to put the date and type in your name in this section here. So, seal for me. A little further down, your clients are going to signature on this line here. If there's a partner or a second buyer, they're going to sign there as well. Put the dates, and I normally don't put their phone numbers, but if you want to, you definitely can feel free, okay? Now, once more, you're going to put your name on this line as the name of salesperson, broker, or broker of record, and you're going to sign this line here. This is a declaration of insurance, essentially saying that as required by the Real Estate and Business Brokers Act, you are insured as a realtor. Errors and omissions and all those insurances that you paid for when you first got your license, okay? On this line, you're going to put the date, whatever date they are signing the paperwork. So we're going to put the 5th of March again. And once more, your buyers are going to sign these lines and put the dates down there. Okay, so that is the BRA, very straightforward. Again, it's just a contract to make sure that you and your clients know you're working together and they're essentially attached to you for a certain period of time. Not everyone gets this signed right up front. Some people want to work on the trust method and just work together until they find a property, but we can discuss that on a separate session, okay? Next is the working with a realtor form. Again, as I explained before, this essentially just explains the difference between a customer relationship versus a client relationship. You can definitely feel free to read all of this when you have some time if you haven't read it already. When I first got started with real estate, I read every transaction 5-10 times to understand it. And now it's kind of second nature, so I don't look into it too much anymore. But it is all very simple and very straightforward. So you're going to put your clients' names on this line as the acknowledgement by. And we're going to put John Steele and Maxine Steele. And if you're working with a seller client, they're going to sign on this side. So you put the name Justo Inc. Brokerage over there. Okay. For today's example, we're only working with the buyer transaction paperwork. So we're going to stick to the buyers. And in most cases, your clients will initial only this top line here because it is Justo Inc. Brokerage is representing my interests to be documented in a separate written agency agreement. And I understand that the brokerage may represent and or provide customer service to other buyers and sellers. So as discussed, we're representing your client's interests or the buyer's interests, which are documented in a separate agreement, which is that BRA document that we just looked at, okay? But they initially here to say they understand that we're working with them. And of course, signatures and dates on these lines. Third document, this one's very important. We have the confirmation of cooperation and representation. Once again, this document outlines that we're working with these clients exclusively. And for the specific transaction that we're putting an offer in on or that we had the offer accepted for, we are going to be paid commission based on this agreement, okay? So you're gonna have the buyer's names on these lines, of course. You're gonna have the seller's name for whatever property you look at, you'll put the seller's name there. So for today's example, I pulled up this property at 1559 Marsh Court Drive. And the seller is Lee Fay. So we're just gonna copy and paste the seller's name there and drop it right into the paperwork, okay? For the transaction known as 1559 Marsh Court Drive in Pickering. All right, so this document is going to be for that specific paperwork and that specific transaction. Going to these boxes here, I normally click off A and then 1. So listing brokerage represents the interest of the seller in this transaction. And it's further understood and agreed that the listing brokerage is not representing or providing customer service to the buyer. So what this means is, again, it's explicitly clear the seller works with the seller's agent or the listing agent, and they are not giving us any customer service to our buyer and our buyer client, okay? If it were a multiple representation agreement, we'd click on this box instead to say that we are the sellers, but we're also working with the buyers and giving them service as well. We then scroll down here and we'll click on A for the cooperating brokerage represents the interest of the buyer in this transaction. Again, same things I just explained. We're working with the buyers in this transaction. We are the cooperating brokerage, okay?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Yeah, but why did we skip the top part? Like, can you explain us like a multiple representation, and below that.
Yeah, so as I said, multiple representation means,
Yeah, below that.
okay.
Yeah, like here.
Right, so this is if the property is not listed, then we'd use this. So the brokerage either does or does not represent the buyer, and the property is not listed with any real estate. So for example, if you found a property that was for sale by owner, you could use this document, you could use this square here.
If it's by owner.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a buyer.
That's right.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so either the brokerage will be paid by the seller in accordance with whatever agreement they work on with you, or the commission will be paid by the buyer directly. So you click off whichever one is appropriate there, okay? Now, I've never worked with a for sale by owner successfully before, so I've never used it, but that's what you would use it for. If you ever come across a property, for example, that your client likes, and they want to use you to help negotiate on their behalf for someone who's selling their house privately, maybe on Kijiji or Craigslist or some other website. Okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and then any other additional comments you have, just for clarification purposes, can be typed in this box here. Okay, good question. Thank you very much for that. And of course, your buyer is going to initial here. You, as the realtor, are going to initial in this circle here, and the seller and seller's agent will sign in these circles there. Okay. Any questions about this section so far? Number 3. Okay. Again, everything else is relatively clearly outlined in these lines or paragraphs. So essentially, you're just clicking the box that matches your situation for that transaction. So in typical transactions, we're going to mark off box A because we're the cooperating brokerage and we represent the interests of the buyer in this transaction. If we're providing customer service to a buyer, then we'd mark off this box instead. If we don't represent the buyer and we have no agreement with them at all, then we'll mark off this box. Okay, typically it's going to be A. And for this section here, again, very typically, we're going to mark off box A because we're going to be paid a very specific commission based on that listing agreement or the listing on the MLS. So normally it's going to be 2.5% plus HST, or it could be 3%, or it could be 1%. Whatever the listing says is what we're going to ask for. So this listing in particular says 2.5% plus HST. Okay. If there were a different type of agreement, we might put that in this box here. So we might say, if we find a listing that says 2.5% plus $3,000 if firm by March 7th. So you might come across those type of listings as well that give a little bonus if you go firm by a certain date. So you put that in this box here. Go ahead.
What does it mean, firm by March 7th?
That means if the transaction is firm or all the conditions have been met by March 7th, then we're going to get an additional $3,000 commission.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you don't come across those often, but you might if the seller is very urgently trying to sell and they want to offer that type of incentive to help the transaction move along faster. Okay. And of course, simply here, you put your brokerage's details on these lines. We're going to put your name down here and then signature on that line. Of course, the date will be there as well. And the listing side is going to do the same on their side. So we don't fill in the listing side. We don't have to. Once we submit the agreement of purchase and sale along with this document to the seller, if the deal goes through or it's being negotiated, the seller will sign this part themselves. Okay. Now, another box that is sometimes initialed by accident or by mistake is this consent for multiple representation. Now, this is only going to be initialed by clients if the sellers and the buyers are working with one realtor and one brokerage. So you're working with both clients at the same time. Some people initial it because they see a circle that says buyer's initials, so they just put their initials there. You don't have to, unless you're representing both sides, okay? So most times you're going to skip this box completely and just go down here, have your client sign signature for buyer or signature, or the second signature for buyer line, and then the dates. All right, all that pretty clear so far?
Yeah.
Perfect. Next is the big one, the agreement of purchase and sale. Now, again, I emailed you guys the plain English forms so you can read through all the clauses yourself. I won't go through those, but I will go through everything that you can fill in on this document so you know what to put. For the very first boxes, you're just going to put the date. So this is the easiest way to do it. Click on that and just click on the date there. You're going to have your buyer's names as you have for all the other paperwork and the seller's name as well. Okay. For the property, you're going to put the address just as it is on the MLS, and actually a shortcut to get most of this information there to start. And I'll go into more details on this part when we do our Authenticign training specifically. But on any listing that you're putting an offer in for, just click on the Authenticign link on that listing. And it should fill in a lot of that information for you right off the bat while you're going through that wizard of entering different things into it. Okay. But we'll go into that in more detail in the next training specifically for that. So for the address, you're going to put it there. When it says fronting on, this is what you're looking for, frontage. So fronting on, this is going to be W for west, okay? Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, perfect. So fronting on the west side of Marsh Court, you're going to put that street name there. In the city of Pickering. Okay, so fronting on, you're always going to find in the same spot, just right here. Side of, you're going to put the street name and in the city of or the town of, whatever it is, and the name. Okay. When it says having a frontage of, you're going to find that right here. This is going to be your frontage, that first number, and this is going to be your depth. Okay. So frontage is 29.86 feet. And depth is going to be 115.55 feet. And legally described as, that's where they're looking for the legal description. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The legal description, right here. I normally just copy and paste most of this stuff.
But what does it mean, the legal description?
Yeah, so the legal description essentially is when the township recognized the property as real property, or when the builders put the property up, they were assigned a legal description. So if you're looking on a city plan, for example, and there was an outline of the city, you might see this as that property's legal description.
Thank you.
Of course, you're welcome. For most of our general knowledge, we don't have to know that, but it will be on every listing because every property has a legal description. Okay. So it's mostly for when the deal is done and all of this information is going to the lawyers and the city to transfer mortgages and to transfer ownership. That's when they would use that, more back-end stuff. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So you just copy and paste the legal description in there. Sometimes if the description is too long, you might see continued in brokerage remarks. So you just go down here and copy the rest of the description.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Most times it'll be in that one section there. Down here, the part where most negotiations and most deals are either made or broken, you're going to find the purchase price. So this property is being sold at $988,000. We'll have a negotiation seminar separately. So for now, we're just going to put asking price, $988,000. And you'll see that the software puts in the words for that number automatically. If you're doing it by hand, write that yourself. But mostly it's going to be done automatically, okay? Now for the deposit, you have three options here. If you're working with a property that is asking for multiple offers and they have an offer date, some of them might say, bring your deposit check, which is going to be a bank draft or certified check, at the same time as you're bringing your offer. So that's where you'd say deposit herewith. You're giving them the offer and the check at the same time. Otherwise, you're going to most typically use upon acceptance, which means within 24 hours of the deal being accepted, you're then going to deliver the deposit check to the listing brokerage.
Mm-hmm.
Your final option is going to be as otherwise described in this agreement. So if you use that, you might go down to Schedule A and say, deposit check will be delivered within 2 business days. Maybe it'll be within 5 business days. And most times if I'm using that section or as otherwise described, I'd have a conversation with the listing agent first. Just let them know what's going on so there's no surprises there. I might call them and say, my client has to get their money from their RRSP account, so they have to transfer it over. It's going to take 48 hours to get the check to you. Is that okay? And they'll let me know right up front. Usually it's no problem. It is a people business, human-to-human interaction. Everyone has their issues and their challenges, and it's a minor inconvenience. Normally they'll still work with you. Okay, so for today I'm going to put upon acceptance, just to keep it simple. And your deposit amount will be put in here. That number can vary as well. Some listings say minimum deposit of 5% required. Some might not have a deposit minimum at all, so you can put in whatever you want to. Now, the deposit can be a strong tool in negotiations as well, but we will get into that again in a separate section. So for today, we're going to say we'll put 10% of the purchase price as our deposit. And here where it says by negotiable check payable to, you're going to put the listing brokerage in this box, unless there's separate instructions. So we're just going to copy and paste Right Home Realty Inc. brokerage. And when your client goes to make their check, that is who they're making the check out to, the listing brokerage, okay? Coming down here, you're going to see the schedules. So again, if there are any additional schedules attached to your agreement of purchase and sale, this is separate from the BRA, we put those in here. Normally there will be a Schedule A, and sometimes, if we don't include our own Schedule A, which we always do, the listing will have schedules attached to their listing as well. So you're going to find those at the top of the listing page right here. So we'll click on that. They have a Schedule B, which has all of their own terms and conditions to review. Normally they're pretty standard, but we have to sign this as well. So we'll just download this to our computers. Here we're going to put Schedule A, and we'll put a B there as well. And it's simple as that. Make sure your clients sign that Schedule B along with all of the other paperwork, okay? Now for the irrevocability, what this means is, because we're on the buyer side, we're going to say the buyer essentially cannot take back or change the offer that we submit for a certain period of time. So irrevocability means the time period that you can't change your offer. Okay, so because we're on the buyer side, once again, we're going to say buyer, this offer shall be irrevocable by the buyer until, let's say, 6 p.m. today, or 6 p.m. this evening. Now, like everything else in the paperwork, the irrevocability can be used as a negotiation tool. Normally, I like to put short irrevocability windows just to make sure the seller has reason to review our offer quickly. Because we're agreeing to not change our offer until 6 p.m., that means if they wait all day until 5:30 and our client says, hey, I'm getting anxious, there's one more property I want to put an offer on, but I don't want to wait for this one, you're stuck until 6 o'clock. So you can't do anything else until 6 p.m. happens. But if you're a bit more on the aggressive irrevocability side like I am, I might put maybe 1 o'clock. So they have essentially from now an hour and a half to get back to us with an agreement, with an acceptance or a counter offer. If they don't get back to us, then we're essentially saying after 1 o'clock, we're free to take our offer back. We're no longer bound by this agreement. My client might find somewhere else, so you better get back to us as soon as possible. Okay, is that pretty straightforward?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And for the completion date, this is just the date of closing, or the date that your client wants to take possession of the property. So we'll say our client wants to take possession on March 30th. Normally I choose either Mondays or Fridays. You could do the middle of the week as well, but it all depends on how convenient it would be for your client to find a moving truck or to take time off work during that time of the week. And you should never use closings on weekends or holidays because lawyers often don't work on those days, so they can't actually do the transaction during those times. All clear there? Okay, and then your clients are going to initially hear for the buyers. Sellers will sign their own when they've reviewed. Now for this section, most people don't use fax numbers anymore, so normally leave those blank. But for the email address for delivery of documents to the buyer, I normally put my own email address, mark@solarhome.com. I like using my personal one because I find I check that more automatically rather than having to switch over to my business email address or my Justo email address That's a matter of preference. On some listings, you're going to see the seller's or the seller agent's email as well. So you copy and paste that there. If you don't have it, then again, just give them a call and ask them for their email directly. So on this one, they do have it here. 24-hour notice as per seller. Email Jimmy Kazansi for appointments or questions. And then again, it says offers only via email as per seller. So same exact thing. Just copy and paste email address, put that there. Now for the chattels included, this is anything that is being included with the transaction of the property. Most times you're going to see things standard like the stainless steel appliances, the electrical light fixtures, maybe some of the blinds that are on the windows. So you can normally find those in extras. Here, all they have is all existing appliances. Perfect. So we're going to copy and paste that into the chattels included. Okay. For fixtures excluded, you might see certain things that they don't want to include with the transaction, and you'll see those often in the same extras section. So I did a deal recently in Peterborough where the sellers didn't want to include their hot tub. So they had hot tub in the fixtures excluded. Okay. There are some situations where they have a hot tub, for example, that they intend to take with them when they leave the property, but they forget to put it in here. Now, whatever you see or your client sees when they first view the property and the offer is all done, they might assume the hot tub is included, and that can be a sticky issue legally. Because if they move into the property and they see the hot tub is gone, they might say, hey, there was a hot tub here, what happened to it? And the seller's agent says, well, they took it with them, it was theirs, and that was never in the paperwork or never explicitly discussed. It can be an issue. So make sure that anything your client wants that's in that property, put it in chattels included. And if they don't intend to sell it with the house, you'll have negotiations on that, or just take it out. Okay? Make sure everything that you want, or everything you don't want.
I can't hear you.
Thank you. Make sure everything that you want or everything that you don't want is included in this paperwork, just so there's no legal issues somewhere down the line.
Thank you.
Okay. And then rental items. Normally it's going to be the hot water tank in here. So you could put HWT, or you could write out hot water tank.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the most straightforward, one of the most common things you'll see as a rental item. Now for HST, it's either going to be included in or in addition to the purchase price. I've only ever seen the HST included in the price. It might be in addition to the purchase price if it were a brand new property or a new build. But I think more commonly now, new build properties are including HST in the price as well. So as a standard default, I'll always say include. And if it's anything different, you'll be notified. Again, have your initials for your buyers in this circle there. Now for the title search, number 8, I like to put 1 week prior to the closing date for this title search. Okay. Now essentially the title search period means that up until that date, so the 23rd, the lawyer is going to look at any liens, any encumbrances, anything that might be on the back end of this property legally. If they owe any taxes, for example, or if there's anything that is deficient with this property, they're going to check all of that information in the back end up until that date. Okay. And again, you'll be notified by your lawyer if anything alarming comes up as well. I've never seen an issue where something substantial affects the deal with this section here. In this present use, I often leave it blank by default, but you could put whatever the present use of the property is. So again, if it's a single family home, if it's a duplex, you could put duplex, you could put triplex, whatever the use is, you can put it in there. But again, normally I leave it blank. Okay, scrolling down. Again, all of these things, I sent you the document with the plain English versions, so read through those to see what they mean in very simple language, okay?
Thank you.
Of course. And number 28 for successors and assigns, you're going to have your client's signature, their buyer lines, and then for the dates there. Commonly, some people think that you need to have a witness on this section. You don't, as long as they're adults and they're of the age of buying properties, you don't need a witness. If you're there signing with them, you can put yourself as a witness if you'd like to. And again, the seller is going to sign on their lines and put their date as well. Spousal consent, I've never used this myself, but this would be in a situation of maybe if the spouse is not one of the legal owners of the property or they're not on title for that property, but they still want to give their consent to say, I agree to the sale of this property or purchase of the property, for example, they can put their initials or their signature on this line, okay? And for the confirmation of acceptance, this is where the seller will sign and put the date or time to say, we've accepted this offer on this date and this time. Now, if the seller sends you a counter offer, so they change, say, the price that you offered them, and now you're the buyer, you're receiving their counter offer, you have the choice to accept their counter. So if you accept their counter, you're going to sign the confirmation of acceptance as the buyer side. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Here, as everywhere else, you're going to put the information of the brokerages. So listing brokerage. Listing brokerage is going to put their name, phone number, and the salesperson's name. Same thing with ours, as you see here. And then acknowledgement. This section essentially says that we, as the clients, have received an offer of this paperwork, and we're going to provide it to our lawyer. So they're going to sign on these lines, put the dates, and you can put their lawyer's information here as well. Typically, I've only had my clients sign the boxes because I don't know their lawyer up until after the transaction is done. But whatever information you have, just put it down here. And then for the commission trust agreement, you're going to sign here as the cooperating brokerage, Realtor, and the seller is going to sign on that side. Okay. And of course, we've all seen Schedule A's before. So I normally use a very standard set of clauses for most transactions I do. Whatever clauses you use, you're going to put those here in the Schedule A. So the most typical clauses you'll see are conditional on financing, conditional on inspection. Seller agrees to give the property in a broom swept condition. Seller agrees to give buyer 3 access visits prior to closing. So I'll send you guys an email with the typical clauses I use, just so you can see the wording that I'm putting in there. And again, it is very standard for every transaction. Normally, I'll send you those afterwards, but we're going to come back to it. Okay, so that is the APS, or agreement of purchase and sale. Pretty straightforward. Again, essentially, you're just following the prompts, putting what they're asking you to put in. Okay. Any questions on that so far?
Clear.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we are going into the offer summary document. So this is the Form 801. On a lot of listings, you might see include Form 801 with your offers. Technically, if the listing broker is receiving offers and they have a way to maintain a record of the agreement of purchase and sale, they don't need an offer Form 801. So either or works as a history of the transaction. But a lot of brokers want to include it just because it's an easy thing to do. And some of the regulations changed a couple of years ago. And some people were still confused about what has to be done. So everyone just does it. And it's relatively quick to do either way. Okay, so again, it's very straightforward. Essentially, as the buyer, you're putting the details of the property on the first line. You're putting the date of the offer on this line, mortgage information, your information, your buyer's information. They're going to sign on the appropriate lines and put the dates. And then you'll say this offer was submitted by email, for example, to the listing brokerage at 11:45 a.m. on today's date. And it's irrevocable until 1 p.m. on today's date. Okay? So this document is essentially just a record of the offer, saying when it was submitted, how it was submitted, and how long the other side has to agree to your deal. And once the seller either counters us or accepts our offer, they're going to sign their portions appropriately. So this is going to be for listing brokerage receiving the offer. Okay. So offer was received at this email by this time. It was presented to my sellers by email or in person at this time. And the offer was either accepted, signed back, or declined. Straightforward. Next, we have the notice of fulfillment of conditions. Now we're going to look at this one very closely with the waiver form. They are similar, but they're still a little bit different. Okay, so for the notice of fulfillment of conditions, as I mentioned, the standard conditions you're going to use are conditional on home inspection and conditional on financing. If you're working with a condo transaction, you might have a condition for review of the status certificate by the buyer's lawyer. So once you fulfill those conditions, you have your client do the inspection, everything passed to their satisfaction. You've done the financing condition, and your clients now have a mortgage that is approved and they're ready to go firm with the deal. You copy and paste the exact wording of those conditions from your agreement of purchase and sale into this document here. So just to be clear, I'm going to show you what that looks like, just for the sake of being thorough. Go back to the APS for 1 minute. I'm going to copy and paste the wording that I used for conditions for a recent transaction that I did. These 109 Dean Avenue. Okay. APS. So for this one, I used offer conditional on the buyer arranging a first mortgage, and they're going to arrange it by 7 p.m., 3 days after acceptance of our offer. So I'm going to copy and paste that one. We didn't use an inspection condition because we want to make it as strong of an offer as possible. Saying we don't need an inspection, the only thing we need to do is confirm our financing. Okay. The other conditions I used were buyer agrees to pay the balance of the purchase price, subject to adjustments to the seller on completion of this transaction. Essentially, just a way of saying, once this deal gets to the closing date, the buyer is going to pay the remainder of the transaction price, minus the deposit that we gave at the start of the transaction with our offer, and they're going to pay that through the large value transfer system. You don't have to put this, but I dealt with a realtor recently who said this has to be in there for his brokerage to accept it, so I put it in there for him. I also used the buyer had opted to waive any condition on inspection, just so the buyer and I are on the same page that they chose not to have an inspection done. This is more for my own protection. So a year down the line, they can't say, hey, well, we wanted an inspection and you didn't let us have one to make our offer stronger. Well, you agreed to it, so I put it here in the paperwork. Okay? Everything on writing is going to be the best way to protect yourself and to protect your client. And I also put seller will deliver the home to the buyer in broom swept condition, and buyer will be allowed 3 property visits prior to closing. Okay, so again, what I came here for, condition for the mortgage. So I'm going to put that in our mock offer here. And once that condition has been met, I'm going to copy and paste the exact same wording and put it in our notice of fulfillment of condition, which essentially says that the offer from this date for this property, with this seller and that buyer, we met this condition. That condition has been fulfilled. It's complete. Okay? And this is one of the documents that your buyer is going to sign, the seller will sign, and we'll keep it on our records here at the brokerage as well. So you date it in whatever city you're in at the time. Let's say dated at Toronto at 3 p.m. on tomorrow's date. Your buyer will sign, and they're going to sign the date as well. Sometimes the seller will have conditions too that have to be fulfilled, but we'll talk about those when we look at the seller paperwork next week. And the seller is going to sign on this line for receipt acknowledged at whatever time, print their name, and put the signature. Okay. So once that document is signed, essentially that means your deal is firm and you can be excited to close the deal with your client. Now the waiver form, again, is very similar. It is used in situations where there's a condition that you had on the agreement of purchase and sale, but your client doesn't want to use that condition anymore, or they're waiving that condition. So for example, they may have wanted to get an inspection, but for whatever reason, they said, you know what, they provided an inspection report to us already, or we're comfortable with the condition of the property. We don't need this condition anymore. So you'd copy and paste that same condition here in the waiver form to say we are waiving the condition on inspection. We'll put inspection there for the sake of our example. Okay. So to clarify once again, this waiver form is used if your client no longer wants a condition to be important for that deal, and you'd use the notice of fulfillment of conditions to say the client met that condition and is now complete. Very straightforward form, same signatures in the same spots as the fulfillment. Okay, so two more documents here. Next, we're going to have the individual identification information record. This is that FinTrack form that we might hear about often. Essentially, this just verifies your clients. So we know who they are, where the money is coming from, and we can relatively ensure that the money isn't fraudulent, okay? This is a very straightforward form as well. You're going to put the transaction property address, same thing we've put 100 times at this point. You're going to put your name here in the sales rep line and the date that the verification was done, today's date. There are a few sections that you can use to verify your client's information, but normally I just use the simple ones in section A. So I put their full names. You're going to do one form for each client, okay? I'm going to put Don Steele here, put his full address at 123 Main Street, Mississauga. His date of birth. If you ask your clients for their driver's licenses, you can find most of the details you need from there. So we're going to say he was born on March 1st, 1980. Okay. Nature of principal business or occupation. Here's where you put whatever they do for work. So John is going to be, if I was not doing real estate, I'd be an actor. All right. So name of principal business, he's an actor. So this verifies that he has money coming in from his occupation. Okay. Now for A1, federal, provincial, territorial government issued photo ID. This is good verification for your client. And normally, again, I just ask for the driver's license. So you put type identification, driver's license, document number, you'll see the number of the license. So it'd be S817, whatever the numbers are on there, okay? Issuing jurisdiction, you can put the province, Ontario, country, Canada, and the expiry date. Again, you're going to find that on the documents as well. Okay. If they didn't want to provide photo ID, you might use a credit file instead. So you can say name of Canadian Credit Bureau holding the credit file, whatever credit bureau they want to give you, and reference number for that file. Or for a third option, you could use the dual ID process method, which is getting certain accounts that they put money into or they take money out of, or accounts that they pay for bills, for example. All of these things are a lot more complicated. Just get their driver's license and ask them for their job. It's so much easier, and it's a matter of a text, okay? Scrolling down here, you have a couple other spots that would be filled for different situations or different types of clients. I have never filled these sections in myself. I never had to because I've always just done the first section there. But again, everything is very straightforward. It's writing out exactly what it's asking you to fill in. So if they're unrepresented by unrepresented individual, reasonable measures record. Okay, so if they weren't represented by you for whatever reason, you would ask them for information to ascertain their identity, and you put the details of that in here as well. So maybe you can say you asked them for their license, or you asked them for a passport, or you asked them for their tax bill, or whatever it is. Same thing for third party. A lot of things that you're not going to need for a typical transaction. I've never dealt with these myself. The only other box I check is here for a low risk Canadian citizen. There you go. And if you keep it as simple as that, you'll be okay with this paperwork, okay? And then residential property. So you're really only checking two boxes outside of that first section. They're low risk client, and you're acting as an agent for them for a residential property. If it's commercial, you'll put residential or commercial property. Okay? That's pretty straightforward. And finally, you're going to have your receipts of funds record. So once your transaction has been accepted and you're depositing the receipt, you're likely going to get the receipt from your client and then deposit it yourself to the listing brokerage. So here's where you're going to put information about that check. Your clients don't have to sign this. This is just for you and the brokerage records, okay? So essentially, you're going to put the transaction address again, your name and the date, and the amount of funds received is going to be put in this B, information on funds. So the amount of funds received is going to be whatever that deposit amount was, 98,800. Currency is likely going to be Canadian. The date that you received the funds, so you might have got it the next day. Type of funds you're going to put here, so it's either going to be a check, certified check, cash, bank draft, or e-transfer. For the sake of deposits, it has to be a certified check or a bank draft, okay? There's only been one instance where I submitted a deposit through a wire transfer, and I put e-transfer there, and then I just put explain on that one. Most times it'll be one of these. I normally just ask my clients to get a bank draft, and that's the easiest way to do it. For purpose of funds, I'll put deposit for purchase, just as it says here. Other details concerning receipt, I have nothing else to put there. If they deposit the check themselves or they deliver it themselves to the brokerage, I might put that in this line. Funds were delivered directly from client to listing brokerage. Okay. For section D, you're going to put in person because most likely the deposit will be delivered in person. Otherwise, you check one of the other boxes. Currency, Canadian. Number of the account, you might see this on the actual check itself. So you can just copy the number on the check, whatever account they used, and an account holder will likely be your client's name. So John Steve. All right. For receipt of funds, I normally don't fill this in. But that would be if there's any other measures taken through that deposit. Again, you don't need that part for most transactions. Okay? So most of these documents after the agreement of purchase and sale are very straightforward. You're just entering the details as they're asking you for them. And there's no need to complicate them or make them any more than they have to be. Everything that they're asking for is right there on the paper. All right, so that's the last document that we have for buyer transactions. To review quickly, we have the buyer's representation agreement, we have the working with a realtor form, we have the confirmation of cooperation and representation, we have the agreement of purchase and sale along with whatever schedules are included with that transaction. We have the offer summary document or Form 801 as you'll often see it written out. We're going to have the notice of fulfillment of conditions or the waiver form. And you'll have the commonly known FINTRAC form or the individual identification information record. FINTRAC is a lot easier. And you'll have the receipt of funds record. All right, so when you're submitting an offer to the listing side, you're only going to need the confirmation of cooperation and the agreement of purchase and sale, as well as the offer summary document if they ask for it. Just these three. Okay. When you complete the transaction, you're gonna have to send everything onto HubSpot because all of those documents have to be kept on record, again, in case Rico comes by and wants to review our documents, okay?
And also, I think we're not allowed to keep them on our computer. Is that correct or no?
That's right. Normally it's for FINTRAC. We don't want to keep any licenses or any details of personal accounts or financial accounts on our cell phones, on our laptops. Paperwork, you can keep a record of that, but for the personal information, the licenses and financial stuff, you can't keep that. So for simplicity's sake, I just put everything on HubSpot and take it off my computer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's no real need for you to keep all the documents on your computers anyway, because you'll save space on your computer just putting on HubSpot. Right? Okay, so that is all the documentation I have for you. Let me see if I can this screen share here. I'm not sure where to end the screen share. Let me see here.
Mark, is this going to be on YouTube?
Yep, everything's being recorded right now. I'm pretty sure I clicked record, so I haven't done this for a long time. I haven't done this for a couple of years now, but everything will be saved and put on YouTube. I'm trying to find where to end the screen share. Pause share.
Maybe stop the share screen.
Yeah, I clicked on that. Oh, stop share. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
All
Mark.
right, so that's it, guys. Any other questions as of right now for the paperwork?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna come to the office. I'm gonna print them, and I'm gonna do everything one by one. So make sure
Okay.
and I don't lose all this knowledgeable information that you gave me.
Of course, sounds great. If
Then
anytime you want to practice the paperwork or just fill in a mock offer, you can definitely feel free to choose any property on the MLS, go through the paperwork on Authenticsign, and put me as a client to sign or review the paperwork, and I'll be happy to do that for you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The more practice you get, the easier it's going to get, and you'll realize that after a certain time, it's just a matter of copying and pasting certain things, and you can do an offer in 5 minutes. I've done it myself several times.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Perfect job, Mark. I appreciate that. Everything's well explained. And if you can send the clauses out as well, just so
Yes.
the common clauses that are used in the forms, that'll go hand in hand with everything. But great presentation, everything well explained. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback. I'll send the clauses that I typically use right now over the next 5 minutes. And there should be something on the share drive that has a list of other clauses you can use as well. So if I can find that, I'll share that with you guys too. But for now, I'll just send you the ones that I commonly use, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, you're welcome. Look forward to the next one. We're doing seller documentation next week.
Every Thursday?
Yeah, I'm looking for every Thursday right now. I've sent you invites for, I think, 6 or 7 Thursdays from now. And as more topics come up, we'll just keep adding them, okay?
Sounds good.
All right,
Yeah.
guys. Talk to you very soon.
Bye.